Hello and welcome into Season 9, Episode 3 of Maroon and Bold. I am your host and sports editor, Austin Chastain, alongside in the Zoom call with staff reporter Christian Boer and multimedia/podcast editor Ben Ackley. And Christian, how are things going for you? I think, week 3 of the fall semester? Everything going well so far, man?
Yeah, man. So far, so good. And we've passed the honeymoon phase with classes. It's time to get in and start working on projects, and even to a lesser exams already, kind of written exams. So we've settled in now, and we're past the honeymoon phase, and it's time to go. How about you, man? How you doing?
Right there with you, man. It's time to just go grind it out. That's what we do. So it's definitely been a challenge, but we're taking it one day at a time. That's pretty much all we can do at this point. But last week we kind of did like a little bit of a different topic, I guess, where we had a list of top 5 moments in games in CMU history. Of course, some honorable mentions in there, but I kind of wanted to try that again. It seemed like, it kind of worked really well. So we're going to try it again this week and next week. This week, we are going to take a look. And before I tell you what we're going to do, it's probably already going to be in the title, but, whatever. CMU came out with its Hall of Fame class of 2020, headlined by Sue Guevara, Margot Yonker, Dan Lefevre, Joe Staley, Katie Simon, and
Tyler Stovall.
Tyler Stovall, thank you. Sorry about that. My brain just completely skipped out right there. So we're going to kind of come up with our own CMU Hall of Fame. I guess the Maroon and Bold Hall of Fame, if you will, in the next 2 weeks. So this week, we're going to take a look at the top 5 student athletes in CMU history. And then next week, we're going to take a look at the top 5 coaches in CMU history. I totally just dropped that on Christian, by the way.
Yeah, I like it.
He had no idea. So that's what we're going to do this week. We're going to start with the players. I've got 5 and a couple of honorable mentions. I believe Christian has 5 and
yes.
Potentially some honorable mentions. Again, with these lists like we did last week, I have no idea what Christian has written down. He has no idea what I have written down. So it could either lead to a surprise or really boring discussion. I'm hoping that it's the former of those two, not the latter. So, Christian, go ahead and start us off. What is your number 5? We're going to save number 1 for the end.
Right. I'm not going to go backwards this time.
I got you.
But number 5, women's basketball. The first Central Michigan WNBA draft pick, Crystal Bradford, comes in at number 5 for me. She's a star, and I think that she's one of the big reasons why the program is where it is today. She was a part of that. She wasn't a part of the team that went to the Sweet 16, but she played in an NCAA tournament. She won a MAC tournament title. Just a really good all-around player, doing pretty well for herself professionally, and ranks pretty high, in all sorts of different stats, scoring, rebounding. She doesn't top the charts in any of those, which, you could talk a little bit about Presley Hudson and Reyna Frost. I know there's kind of some recency bias there, so I decided to maybe not go with them for the recency. We can talk about them a little bit later down the line, but I'm going to go with Bradford at 5 because I feel like she was the tone setter for the program and is kind of the reason why it is where it is today.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And we'll talk about Crystal again. She's not necessarily on my list, but we'll talk about her again here shortly. But yeah, I definitely agree. So we'll start with my number 5. I could almost guarantee. I wanted to go with one pick that I was almost positive that you wouldn't pick. I just mentioned her a little bit ago, Katie Simon on the gymnastics team. And I say that she's one of the best one of the top 5 athletes. because, and maybe it was just the back end of her career, but the last 2 years of her career at CMU were fantastic. She won 4 individual MAC championships in 2009, her junior year, and then she won 3 more in her senior year in 2010, and she was named MAC Gymnast of the Year in 2010, and she helped lead CMU to the overall MAC, the team MAC championship, and she qualified for regionals twice, while also leading CMU to national regional, tournament. To the NCAA tournament, to the regional round. My brain just shut down right there. So her career best scores in the all-around vault and bars are still within the top 10 in school history. And, I mean, she graduated a decade ago, right? Well, I guess 9.5 years ago, whatever you want to say. So kind of that not just her ability to keep her name in the program as long as she has, in terms of the record book. That's really impressive. And like I said, 7 individual MAC championships in 2 years. That means you're a pretty damn good athlete, if you ask me.
Yeah, for sure. That's dominant enough in my book. Holy cow. Those are some dang good numbers regardless of what sport you play, to be a champion that many times. It's like, wow. Somebody's sticking out there. I'll start with my number 4 now, and we're going to take it to the football side of things. And this is a guy that many people don't really know about, but you look at the numbers, and he's tops in receiving yards, receptions, touchdowns. Titus Davis. Titus Davis is number 4 for me. Not many people are going to talk about him when you talk about some of the best athletes this program's ever had, but statistically, he's one of the best without a doubt. His teams weren't necessarily very good. I know he kind of turned it around towards the end of his career. He had to suffer through a couple of 3-9 seasons. But you talk about the bar being set immensely high by Antonio Brown and Brian Anderson, and Titus Davis came in here, and over his 4 years, he shattered all their records. So I think that you got to give credit where credit is due with him. Like I said, the program wasn't necessarily at the level where it was with Brown and Anderson and Keto Pobla and all those guys, but Titus Davis was just as good, probably better than those guys, and that's why he's going to make my list ahead of like an Antonio Brown and a Brian Anderson. And that's just taking all the on-field stuff into consideration, because obviously Brown was electric and Brian Anderson was as steady as they come along, but in terms of numbers, Titus Davis tops both of those guys, and that's why he's number 4.
Yeah, no, I like that pick a lot. Again, not like you said, not somebody that a lot of people are going to talk about when it comes to the greatest athlete at CMU. We actually talked about him last week too. I literally just before we started recording this podcast, I listened to last week's podcast, and and we had talked about Titus Davis with the 2014 Hail Mary in the Bahamas Bowl. He went and stretched some stuff out and scored the touchdown to bring the game to within a point. But
he scored 4 touchdowns that day too.
Yeah,
a lot of people are only going to talk about the last one. He had 4 touchdowns in that game. He, like I said, program record in all those different areas. In my books, that's an incredible career, regardless of what level you're playing at. If you can come in and set basically every record you can, that's pretty incredible in my book.
Yeah, and you can take down the record of a guy like Antonio Brown, who has one of the who's I think 35th all time in receiving yards in the NFL. He had a pretty statistically sound career in the NFL. Well, more on him later. But yeah, I totally agree. Titus Davis definitely belongs in that conversation, and it's a good pick. I like that.
Thank you.
My number 4. So we were talking about Crystal Bradford earlier. This was where I was really torn. My number 4 is Reyna Frost. Mm-hmm. Yeah, recency bias. Yeah, okay, I'll give that to you. But I think the numbers do speak for themselves. She leads the Mid-American Conference in career rebounds with 1,526. She ranks 4th all-time in CMU scoring with 1,794 points. And just in her senior year alone, she set single-season records in points, scoring average, made field goals, and she was just 10 shy of Julie Roberts' record in the 1979 and 80 season with 449 rebounds. What really, and I'll kind of focus in on Reyna's senior year. Her rebounding ability, of course, we all knew that she can rebound the basketball really well, and that was her strongest asset of the game. But her senior year, she added a shot. She added a jump shot. And those jump shots turned momentum so often when CMU needed that boost. And I mean, it carried. I mean, she and Presley, and obviously, you can argue a lot. It's a team game, but a lot of those momentum swings came from Reyna Frost, and I think that's kind of what carried them so far. Carried them all the way to an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. Like I said, her jump shot was fantastic, and her inside game was just even better. She's able to just put the ball on the floor and get around defenders like it was nothing, and kind of like almost like a scoop shot, like a hook shot almost. And anytime that went up, you knew it was going in, and her physical toughness out there. She kicked some ass out there, and it was definitely impressive to watch. I did hear that she's not playing anymore, actually. She had just signed a deal over in Italy, and one of the local TV stations here in mid-Michigan reported that she's actually no longer playing. She decided, just to hang it up. Coronavirus is kind of – obviously it took a huge toll in Italy at first, and she decided, we're not she decided not to play anymore. So – if she happens to be listening, Reyna, if you happen to be listening to this, a round of applause on a hell of a career, and obviously checking in at number 4 in our, I guess, in my list of top 5 CMU athletes.
Yeah, and I had the privilege of talking to Reyna when this whole thing was going on for a story I did about the pandemic, and she outlined that whole process for me. You're standing in line waiting to go into the grocery store because there's only a certain amount of people that can go in. You're boxed up in your houses. People are communicating with each other through the window. Just sights and sounds of that was just crazy. And just listening to her tell me a little bit about that was like, wow, this is what it was like in other areas, because obviously, living here, we know what's going on, but like in other countries that may or may not have been hit harder than us, it was just kind of neat to hear her side of that story. And, like you said, props to her, hell of a career if she has decided to hang it up for good. I know she's still young, so who knows, but if this is it for her, congratulations. I'll move on to 3. And this is where, you start to kind of nitpick a little bit and decide, okay, who's really and, I could go a couple of different ways with this, but I am going to go with Dan Lefevre at 3. Now, Chastain, you know me well. As a kid, I was a big Dan Lefevre guy, but I kind of got schooled a little bit. My dad's a CMU alumni, and so I thought that maybe there were a couple of people deserving to go a little bit higher on this list. And that's why Dan Lefevre is 3. Obviously, the numbers speak for themselves, all the accolades, all the awards, but there are a couple of guys that I think deserve the place higher, and that's why Dan Lefevre is number 3 on my list.
I am stunned.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely stunned right now.
Yeah.
Wow. I cannot wait to hear your top 2. Wow, that is unbelievable. Wow. Okay. Huh. Why? Okay. I'm gonna ask you why you put Lefevre at 3 when we get to 2 and 1, So that would
Yeah,
be a kind of a backtrack question.
and I think it'll make sense. I think it'll make pretty good sense. I think there's a variable that sticks out between Lefevre and the two guys ahead of him. Spoiler alert: two guys ahead of him,
Okay.
and what they were able to accomplish that maybe he was not necessarily able to do. I mean, he played in a couple of Grey Cups over in the CFL, but that's from a professional standpoint. And plus, there are some guys with some serious accolades that I mean, growing up, I didn't necessarily get to the privilege to watch the two guys at the top of my list, but hearing things about him, my dad, obviously, like I said, CMU alumni, he's kind of spread the word to me, and I think that it'll make sense. It'll make sense.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. So we'll go to my number 3. And if this guy made your list, I'll be a little bit surprised, but not really. I'm going to go with Sugar. Melvin McLaughlin. Melvin Sugar McLaughlin. Wow. I couldn't speak right there. But, yeah, I mean, Sugar was really – and I didn't get a chance to watch him play. I mean, I was born in 1997, so I didn't have that opportunity to see him play. But, just from pictures and from accounts from what people have told me, he's one of the best scorers in CMU history. I mean, he was making 3-point shots before 3-point shots existed in basketball, right? He finished with 2,071 points in his career, and if the 3-point shot had been instituted in that, I mean, that total would be significantly higher. I mean, he was making 28, 30-footers like it was his job. I mean, he had, a career full of accolades and incredible shooting. And another thing, maybe he didn't have the professional basketball impact that maybe some, would argue, but away from the game, I guess away from him playing the game, he organized the Sugar McLaughlin All-Stars, which is like a kind of like a high school program to showcase some of the best high school talent. I think high school and college talent maybe. And they played against college teams. They actually played against CMU, which is fun for him, I'm sure was fun for him. He's a member of the 1993 CMU Hall of Fame class and the Grand Rapids Sports Hall of Fame class of 2005. First team All-MAC in 1981 and 82, and he's one of 4 Chippewa men to win the MAC Player of the Year, which he won in 1982. Going back to Reyna Frost for just a hot second, she also won MAC Player of the Year 2019, one of 4 now to do so. But anyway, Sugar, Sugar checks in at number 3 on my list. He still leads the men's program all time in scoring. Presley Hudson leads, I guess, every Chippewa basketball player. All right, so there's my number 3, Sugar. Christian, you're number 2. This better be good, okay? If you're putting Dan Lefevre at number 3, number 2 and number 1 have got to be good.
Yeah, so number 2 is actually being inducted into the Athletics Hall of Fame with Lefevre. It is Joe Staley. Joe Staley, a guy who, people say offensive linemen aren't athletes. This dude was an athlete. Set some records running track in high school. I believe it was Rockford High School. And he comes to CMU as a tight end. And then if you haven't read our former coworker Evan Petzold's piece for the Detroit Free Press about how he kind of made that transition to offensive line, I suggest you check that out. And basically, the coaches sat Staley down and he said you can either be a decent tight end or you could be a all-American offensive tackle and get picked in the first round. And being a team dude, being an unselfish guy, he took that role and ran with it. And first-round pick, 13-year NFL career, I think that kind of speaks for itself. And so that's why I think that he is he a better athlete than Dan Lefevre? I mean, it goes both ways, man, being that big of a dude and still being able to move as quickly as he did and stay healthy for so long. I think that that's kind of impressive on its own. So Joe Staley is my number 2. Chastain, you're number 2.
Man, okay, I can get behind Staley. being the second guy. I can get behind that. That makes sense. My number 2 is this one might stir some controversy. My number 2, Antonio Brown. Whether you like the dude off the field or not, that he was a hell of an athlete. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it still is. I mean, we don't know if he's still playing in the NFL or not. I don't know. But when he was here, he does. No, nobody does.
Dude, I don't know.
No. But when he was here at CMU, I mean, he was a phenomenal athlete. Appeared in 41 games for CMU, hauled in 305 catches, just 1 yard shot at 3,200 yards, 22 touchdowns, and he was an integral part of that framework to lead that 2009 team to the MAC title. Not only in the receiving game, but his return game, his special teams. I think he was a better return man, honestly, than a wide receiver. I mean, obviously made a lot of noise in the receiving game, but his returning ability was, I think, so much better, and I think that's what set him apart, and ultimately I think that's what got him drafted. Yeah, he was in the 6th round, but ultimately that's what got him drafted, I think. Here at CMU, he had 3 punts, returned for a touchdown, 2 kickoffs, returned for a touchdown, and then makes his way to the NFL. Plays in 131 games and possibly counting, not sure. Hauling in 841 catches, 11,263 yards, like I said before, 35th all time, 75 touchdowns. And in the special teams game, which the Steelers utilized him in the special teams early on in his career and not so much in recent years. But he's brought back 4 punts and a kickoff return for a touchdown. Fun fact about Antonio Brown, in terms of the return game, do you know what it is?
Yes. Because you like to reference this stat a lot, and it's the fact that he's the last one to run back a punt.
You got it. Yes, I refer to that stat a lot, and I don't know why, but
it's
yes.
Cool.
It is pretty cool, and I mean it's been it'll be 11 years since Chippewa has brought back a punt for a touchdown, which is mind-boggling to say the least. You've seen quite a few strong return men. Khalil Pimpleton actually ran a ball back to the end zone last year. I think it was against Eastern Michigan, but it got called back.
Toledo
is the Toledo game? Oh, yeah. That's right. It was the Toledo game. Thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah, and it got called back because of a penalty, and then I think CMU went and scored in like 3 plays or something ridiculous like that. So, turned out to be, all for naught. But yeah, Antonio Brown checks in at number 2 for me. All right, Boer, let's hear it. Who's your number 1?
All right. Yeah. I'm going to just cut right to the chase. Number 1 is Thunder Dan Marley. Dan Marley is number 1. He was there at the same time my dad was there. And, just kind of chatting with him a little bit. There was no environment like the men's basketball games when Dan Marley was there at CMU. When Central was kind of releasing their non-conference schedule for this year and the Wisconsin game came up, I was working on a piece for my blog about, the history between Central Michigan and Wisconsin, and Central Michigan actually beat Wisconsin when Dan Marley was here. And so I was able to go back and look through some of the old CM Life story for that. And it was kind of neat to see them talking about, the coach at the time and Dan Marley talking about the environment and how McGurk Arena was rocking. And I think that that's something that maybe on the men's side is kind of lacking these days. I can't say the same about the women. I mean, the turnout at the women's games are incredible. But on the men's side, I don't think it's the same environment as it was back then. Obviously, winning helps, and maybe the men's basketball program isn't in the same kind of shape as it was when they were winning the MAC title back in the late 80s, early 90s. But yeah, Dan Marley's going to be number one. Obviously, the numbers he put up at Central speak for themselves. Then he went on to have a pretty nice NBA career, in Phoenix. Kind of got a little bit of guff for going at Michael Jordan in the most recent Last Dance documentary. But yeah, Dan Marley edges out Lefevre and Staley for the number one position.
I like it. Before I name my number one, and I feel bad for not asking you about this. Any honorable mentions that you have?
Yeah, I got a few. Yeah, I got a few. So we talked about Presley and Reyna a little bit on the women's basketball side. Obviously, a couple of guys on the men's basketball side. Braylon Rayson, he had an incredible tenure at Central Michigan. You had the 1 year of Marcus Keene, but you had 4 solid years of Braylon Rayson from going and his freshman year playing for the MAC tournament title, and then as a senior running it up with Keene. And then you had David DeLeo, who just graduated this past year. He had an incredible 4 years at CMU as well. And then football, you got a couple of big guys up front. Eric Fisher, and another guy I want to mention, just because I like the way he sounds on the radio, Brock Gutierrez went on to have a pretty nice NFL career for himself as well after a good 4 years at CMU. Brock, if you're listening, shout out to you. You do a wonderful job on the radio, obviously, and a heck of a career at CMU as well. So those are some of the honorable mentions I have. You got to give some love to the linemen up front, and then Brown and Brian Anderson as well for football, and also Zerlon Tipton, a running back, around the same time as Titus Davis. So, yeah, a lot of guys. Cooper Rush is another one. The list goes on and on. Central's been fortunate enough at basically every sport to have athletes who are just incredible at what they do.
Yeah, a couple of those names, kind of, I don't want to say escape the mind, but
I think that it definitely is that way. You don't always think of these guys when you think of the best of all time because of just maybe when they played or the team may not have been very good, but certainly good athletes all around.
Right. And it's I mean, I don't know what else I wanted to say there, but guys like you said, like DeLeo, obviously the MAC leader and three-pointers made in a career. Obviously the school leader, Cooper Rush had an illustrious career here at CMU. Some of those other guys right there with you. I picked out 5 guys to name as my honorable mention. I went with Marley as my number one honorable mention. Chris Kaman made my list as well.
Yeah.
Another NBA guy. Marcus Keene. Yeah, I mean he only played here for 1 year, but I mean he's
incredible.
Ablaze.
He was incredible,
and he's had some success. I mean, his team sideline cancer just 2 months ago, I think. Made the final of the basketball tournament, the TBT, one of the first sporting events to come back to America, I guess. So and he played really well there. He had a lot of showed a lot of what he showed here at CMU with the incredible scoring and incredible passing. And then lastly, Joe Staley and Eric Fisher made my list as well for honorable mentions. Both incredible interior linemen, both at CMU and in the NFL. Obviously, Fisher, the only MAC player to be taken number 1 overall, won a Super Bowl, all kinds of accolades going his way.
Yep.
My number 1, and honestly, I am shocked that we did not have the same number 1, and I don't think you're going to be shocked by hearing my number 1, but I'm going to go with Lefevre as my number 1. I put on my sheet here that he's one of the best quarterbacks to don the maroon and gold. He's one of the best players ever to wear the uniform. The thing was he could do it. He could make plays with both his arm and his legs. I mean, he scored 150 touchdowns and his hands too.
Receiving touchdown.
Yeah, the receiving touchdown. That's right. 102 passing touchdowns, 47 rushing touchdowns, and then obviously the 1 catch. He still holds MAC records for total offense, passing yards, TD passes, completions and attempts. owns 11 career and single season records at CMU. But I think the biggest thing that sets him apart and that puts him at number one, I think, is that he was a 4-year starter, and 3 out of those 4 teams won MAC championship in 06, 07, and 09. The success that he led the team to, I think, so yeah, he was an incredible athlete. He could make any play, and like I think we talked about. Did we talk about this last week? We talked about it last week, that Lefevre could just take control of the offense and impose, lead the offense to impose its will against any defense. But I think the leadership that Lefevre showed in his 4 years is just it was impeccable, and I think that's why I put him at the top of my list. The ability on the field and the leadership that he could that he showed, and yeah, I don't think that needs any further explanation.
I like that pick.
How do we feel? How do we feel about each other's lists?
I like yours. I think there were a couple of names on there that I neglected. Melvin McLaughlin, I think, was the one that I neglected to mention, and then obviously I didn't bring him up in the honorable mentions because you had already talked about him. But I think that was the one that I kind of missed the mark on. But like you mentioned, Katie Simon, who was incredible. Antonio Brown, I think you said that pretty well. Off field, whatever aside, he was phenomenal at CMU on the field. So we're talking athletes, and his name definitely deserves that recognition as well. So I think that you put your list together well, man. I give you props. Yeah,
right back at you, man. I don't know if you were able to hear my shock that Lefevre was at 3, but yeah, no, I liked your list. Obviously think Lefevre might have been able to go number 2. That's my only gripe is Lefevre could have gone one tick higher on the list, but I won't give you too much crap for it. But yeah, we'll continue kind of the Hall of Fame series, if you will, here on Maroon and Bold next week with the top 5 coaches in CMU history. That one I think is going to be even more interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, student athletes come and go. They're here for 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years, depending. Let's face it, they're usually here for 3 or 4 years, and then they go on to play professionally. And I'm thinking, especially like in the 80s and the 90s, early 2000s, CMU was a great place to be for a coach.
Yes.
Now it might, especially in football, it could be seen as, a stepping stone to, either jumpstart a career or to revive a career, depending on, who you're thinking about. But looking back at the coaches, I think that's going to be really interesting because most of them are around for more than, 4 or 5 years. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. I think today's episode went really well, and I'm like I say, I'm really looking forward to next week. Any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
No, sir.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. Stay safe out there. Take care of yourselves, and we'll get through this pandemic together. I promise. Keep an eye out on CM Life social media and my social media as well. Kind of have the kind of a little something in the works for Saturday. What was supposed to be the season opener for CMU in terms of football. So keep an eye out for that. As always, make sure you follow along with us on social media at CM Life Sports, at CM Life on Twitter. You can find Christian at @C_Booer_. You can find me at Chastain AJ. And on Facebook, make sure you find us at Central Michigan Life. And as always, follow along for your top-notch Chippewa coverage at cm-life.com, as well as all other coverage around the campus. And lastly, make sure you follow along with all of our other podcasts here at Central Michigan Life. We have a little bit of a variety of podcasts now, a couple of different topics that we're able to discuss, and obviously able to stick around with Maroon and Bold. So other than that, thank you guys again so much for listening. We'll talk to you again next week when we meet again.